Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm here with Ken Cameron and Russell Stratton, who together have partnered in writing an interesting book, also have a podcast, both called I Need to Effing Talk to You. Definitely an edgy title to that book. We're going to get a little bit into depth on what that's all about, and go from there. So thanks a lot, gentlemen, for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So let's start. I want to start at the beginning, and then let's take our audience here through a trajectory of from where it started to where we're sitting right now. So maybe give us the non-website version of how this whole thing started rolling, how you guys started working together and building this idea to put together the book and the podcast.
Sure thing. Well, Russell and I met over breakfast at one of those early morning networking meetings. So there we were at 7 o'clock, and there was, we were some of the early birds. So there may be 10 people there, and we were blearily staring into our coffee when somebody said, "Hey, you should meet Russell." And that person said at the same time to Russell, "Hey, you should meet Ken, because it seems like you both do interesting things." And so we managed to kind of shake the cobwebs out of our head and engage in a conversation that started us realizing that, in fact, we do have a lot of synergies in the things that we did. The synergy was at that moment, Russell, my background is that I'm a playwright and theater director. I spent the first 25 years of my career working in that world, working in theater and writing plays and also managing nonprofits. And for many years, I ran Canada's National Theatre Festival. And with that, I ran in conjunction with that a Canadian Theatre Conference. But I left that to move into the business world. And it was at that point that I met Russell. And Russell said to me over that breakfast meeting, "Have you ever done anything with this format called forum theater?" And Russell, I'm going to pass the ball over to you to pick up the story from that point.
Yeah, sure. So my background was different to Ken's in that I'd spent time as an operational manager. I was also an HR manager before starting my business originally in the UK, and then moved here to Canada, what is coming up 10 years ago. And one of the things I'd always been interested in from a learning perspective was how do we make learning for people more like a simulation? So how can we make it as real as possible without perhaps having the actual individuals in the room? And my background, I've done some work with law enforcement and ex-military, and as you probably know, a lot of their training is simulation based. So I used the forum theatre modality in the UK, and then when I was looking to do it here but didn't know anybody that knew it, and when I had asked people, they sort of looked blankly at me. And when I met Ken and heard of his background, I asked him, and he went, yes, I do. And we talked a little bit at that coffee meeting, and then we met up afterwards and I sort of pitched him my idea of what I'd been doing, and he added in his thoughts of what he thought might work. And that's where we came up originally with our face-to-face workshops, where we were using professional live actors to work with our participants.
Right. Okay, well, that's interesting. So you guys kind of connected. You had this, one of you has the desire of creating a forum, using almost theatrical elements to I don't want to say virtual learning, but basically a learning system using outside players. And one of you has a bunch of experience working within theater itself, and so you saw the connection there and the tie-in. So you start building this out, and you start obviously using that, getting some experience with that. So then, how did that translate into the book? Because I know the book was first before the podcast came out. So how did you guys translate what you were doing into deciding and then eventually creating this book?
Well, it really started with the workshop itself. In the notion behind forum theater is that it's a kind of stop and start format. And it's also audience participatory. So it lent itself really well to learning in a corporate context. As Russell mentioned, it's often used in law enforcement, and so that you can kind of create a scenario or a situation, and you bring in these live actors. But the actors that we use are not just live actors who are used to following a script. We use those actors who are skilled in improvisation. So these are people who are used to taking the bare bones scenario and then adding life and color and responding in real time to what they're hearing. And then when you couple that with this forum theater modality, which was invented in the 1960s and 70s in Brazil, with the idea of creating social change. So the idea, if you can imagine, that you would have people that would go into the poorest portions of Brazil and they would have a play that maybe it's about some sort of social injustice. Maybe it's about landlords who are charging rent too much or evicting people from their poor squats. And the idea is that you try to motivate people to create let's say a tenants association. So you create a scenario in which there's a family who's being evicted and there's an evil landlord and blah, blah, blah. But then halfway through the scenario, you call time out, you stop, and you ask people from the audience to come up. And what would you do if you were the mother in this situation? What would you do if you were the father? What would you do if you were, and you're trying to convince the real actors to change their motivation by bringing members of the audience to come in. So you can imagine what this might be like in a corporate context where you've got an actor who's playing a difficult employee who needs to be disciplined, but who refuses to accept that they've done anything wrong. And you get the managers who come up one at a time and have that conversation. We can call timeout. They can turn to everybody else in the room, the other participants, which is what's called the forum. So they can ask the forum for advice. What would you do? What would you proceed? And then Russell and I are in the position to be able to say, hey, that's a good idea. Why don't you come up and replace the actor or replace the participant or replace the other person who is just here, and you can try that out and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we can rewind and try something else. And and at various points, we would stop that scenario. Russell would give us a template for how to handle the conversation, and then people would get a chance to try it again with that template in place, and our actor would be able to respond accordingly if they're successful or not successful in doing that.
So how does that translate straight into then the book? Because obviously reading a book is going to be a very different experience than what you're describing with that type of theatrical event, really within the company. I mean, one is very personal, and even from a learning perspective, very kinesthetic. It's very interactive. It's you're touching and feeling that experience, whereas in the book you're going much through a visual learning process. So two very different styles. So how did you manage to translate, and how did you make that work to take that theatrical element of what you're doing and turn it into a book?
Well, there's a couple of things really that, and I'll blow Ken's trumpet in a minute in terms of his wordsmithing. But one of the things from the workshops is it's always about giving people that sort of practice that they could then take away and put in, do it for real the next day. So it was to give people, there were lots of handouts and, links through, go and look at this afterwards and you can take this away with you. So one of the sort of motivators was, rather than us just giving people a binder of handouts, if we were able to get to our end of our workshops and give people a book that had all of that information in it, but it was also written in a way that was engaging and could be read in its own right, then that would be better and sort of would set us apart a little bit from our competition. So over to what Ken was doing. Well, his background in the theatre and as a playwright was able to take the ideas that I'd had, what was coming out of my head from a sort of content point of view, add that to his own thoughts, but then really sort of put it into a bit like reading a play. So there, if you're going to read through the book, as well as having sections in there that are content driven, here's the process for doing X around difficult conversation with an employee. Ken's written the dialogue so that it reads exactly as if you're reading a script that two actors are going to act out. So we've kept some of that look and feel from our Forum Theatre for Business, translates over into the book, that it's like taking one of our workshops and you're reading through what those actors were talking about in the book, which you would have seen perhaps at the workshop.
So what was something that was difficult about making that translation? Like, what were some of the challenges that you faced in translating, just as you've explained? Like it fits well. I can understand the correlation between how one kind of fed right into the other. I'm guessing though that there had to be some difficulties that came around doing that type of thing. So what were some of the hurdles or challenges or barriers you faced going through that process?
Well, I think the first hurdle is the fact that we're not there to guide the individual through the experience.
Right.
So in a workshop, of course, we're present in the room. We do interviews with the clients beforehand so that we're creating scenarios that are as similar as possible to what the employees in that company would be experiencing. Sometimes they're based on real life stories that the manager or supervisor or VP has told us that about the way in which the business operates. So it can be really accurate. But we're also able to, just as the actor is able to improvise by responding to what the participant says in front of them, Russell and I are able to intervene and respond to one another. So as the actor is speaking to the participant, I'm often standing off to one side, giving hand signals to the actor so that I'm guiding whatever direction they might be going. I want them to escalate the conversation or de-escalate the conversation, or give the participant a small win, but then later put up an obstacle. So I have all of these different hand signals that I might use. And then meanwhile, Russell can be at the back of the room signaling me about what to signal the actor to do. So could be a lot of interactivity. And in a way, it's a very dynamic process in which all of the coaches, myself, Russell, and the actor, are all responding to what's going on in the moment in real time. Yeah. In reading the book, as you can imagine, it's printed in the book. It's static, so there's no way to be able to control the reader's experience. So in that sense, you have to really plan out and really think how the reader is going to be progressing through the entire book. What's their journey as they move from chapter to chapter, as they absorb one piece of information or one model, and then see it being applied in one of the sample dialogues, and then they learn something from that, and then they go to this next dialogue. What's their journey like? And you have to try to imagine what the arc of the reader might be like. And we had to try to take that reader on that kind of a journey. So that was quite an interesting challenge that took us, I would say it took us about 2 years to figure that out, I think, Russell. Would that be about accurate?
I think so. And I think that'll be, so the usually work of writing the bulk of the book is down to Ken, the actual penmanship, but it sort of comes to that story arc. So it is that trying to, if somebody had never experienced it, never been on one of our workshops, never worked with actors, that they would still get benefit from the book without having that prior knowledge. So when we sent the book out to our pre-readers for people to give us feedback on it, we selected people who had been on our workshops. And there was one or two of our regular clients who had we'd been worked with their teams many times. So we wanted to get a feel, does it have the sort of look and feel that you had from the workshops live, understanding that it's in written format? But we also wanted to go to people who hadn't experienced those workshops to say, are you still getting benefit from it, and can sort of put yourself in that person's shoes as if they were at a workshop, and it didn't lose anything. And I think we did a pretty good job of hitting that it appealed to both people who've been on the workshop and said, yeah, this is great, this brings it back how it sort of works, and those that hadn't and said, oh, I'd sort of like to go on one of those workshops, because if this is what I got from the book, what would I get if I actually had a chance to do work with the live actors? And that was the other reason we wanted to do it, so people would read it and go, hey, this sounds really cool, I'd actually want to go and do this live.
I think one of the other key structural things that we did that really shaped the book was, which again relates to our workshops. In our workshops, we try to keep the elements in 20-minute increments. So there'll be 20 minutes of Russell explaining a model, and then there's 20 minutes of them filling out a worksheet and thinking about how they want to tackle the scenario. And then there's 20 minutes of them applying it with the actor. And then there's a coffee break. And then there's we reconvene from the coffee break, and here's a second model for you to now layer on top of the first. Here's a worksheet for you to fill out. This time it's only 5 minutes. And now we're going to go right into the actor, and this time it's going to be a little bit longer. It's going to be maybe 25 minutes. So in the same way that we try to make sure that our participants get to learn using different learning styles. So those people who are invested in learning and development might have recognized that there are different learning styles in the sense that there's a one-way flow of information, and then there's an introspective moment where they get to apply it to themselves, and then there's a participatory moment where they get to actually experience it, and then there's a reflection moment afterwards. So there's a lot of different thinking modalities that are going on, and we tried to bring all of that to the book. Now, since this is both an audio podcast and a visual podcast, what I can do is hold up the book right now for the viewers who are watching it, and I'll just kind of flip through a couple of pages, and at the same time, I'll describe it for those who are only listening on the podcast. So here's the book with its scatological cover, I Need to Effing Talk to You, and here's the inside of the book. So here's a little bit inside of an explanation that normally Russell would do of what some of the model might look like and how it applies. It's written just as regular prose. And then you'll see, as I hold it open, you'll see that there's a section in which is now written as dialogue. So that in this place, it's just as you might read if you were to pick up a play at a bookstore, or the actors might do. And then at the end of that is a little worksheet for participants to kind of fill out, saying, well, how do you think that the manager did in this scenario? What could they do different? What could they do better? And then there's a breakdown of, again, that follows of how might that look, followed by what we think that participant did, followed by yet another worksheet, and then followed by, then you're into the dialogue again to see, in which you see the manager now having that conversation, applying the model successfully, and having that conversation now being done successfully. So in that sense, the book kind of follows the flow of what I just described that live workshop might be. And kind of, to go back to your original question, kind of nailing that format in a way that was interactive, interesting, and didn't get repetitive as we moved through the 4 different scenarios that are outlined in the book, because we didn't want it to be repetitive. So each of the 4 chapters is slightly different from each other. Right. And that's the process that took us about 2 years to nail and get that right.
So then, I know that the process took you a couple of years. How long did it take you to write the whole book? How long has this been going on?
Well, again, I think 2 years, because I'm kind of counting I'm counting from the moment of like, well, let's structure it like this, and let's write a couple of sample chapters, to, rereading that and going, this is crap. This is shit. Let's just throw that out. And then losing confidence for a month or 2, and then kind of coming back to it and going, okay, well, what if we did this? And then, still not any good. And then kind of sharing that with a third party and went, actually, that is really good. And then, kind of getting our feet back under us again. So it really kind of took a little bit of time. And then also, along the way too, is that each of the 4 scenarios that are outlined in the book were based on scenarios that were tried and tested in our individual workshops. So as we were writing it over those 2 years, at a certain point, we were like, hey, that workshop we did last month, that was so successful, we've got to include that in the book. So let's make sure we put that in.
As you learn things, you're continuing to modify and add. So 2 years, it's a long time to be trying to accomplish a fairly singular task. Any tactics, I guess, you employed to stay motivated and keeping it progressing?
Well, Russell's really good at holding me accountable. So that was certainly the prime strategy that he used. Would you use any other strategies, Russell?
I think it was just continue keeping an eye on what it was we were looking to achieve. Why were we doing any of this? And it wasn't just, well, we'd like to have a book because wouldn't that be nice? It was part of our business strategy as either to have introduce people to the work we did, and have people then sort of, as I said earlier, want to go and, I'd like to do one of these attend one of these workshops, or people who'd been and said, I'd like something I can take away that I can refer to again. So that was, we'd always had that as an intention, and I suppose the third point was to have it a little like to replace our business card. It was going to be a slightly more expensive business card, rather than saying, here's my business card. It was like, here's my book. So I think we never lost sight of that's what we wanted to do. Excuse me. And that got us through those periods when it sort of dipped down, and we thought, perhaps there were a couple of posts where it sort of dragged a little bit, and we couldn't quite find the key to unlock it. The other point was our pre-readers. So these were people who already were invested in what we did. Either as clients or some who were friends of ours from a business perspective. And so they were like sort of cheerleaders in a way. So if we'd send it out to them and they were coming back saying, yeah, that's great. Yeah, change this bit, but keep the rest of it the same and keep going. So it was important to have a support from people who were going to give us honest and constructive feedback, but we're also going to keep encouraging us to look. We want to read the final version. Can you get it done? So I think that was important as well, to have that support network of people who were going to keep cheering us on.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a challenge. It sounds simple, finding people that are going to be honest with you. But one of the things that we're always challenged with is hurting people's feelings. It's just it's part of the human element. Or the human condition. So how did you, was it luck of the draw? And it's okay if it was, but was it luck of the draw and you just happen to have people around you that were willing to be totally honest with you and say, yeah, I like this element, I don't like this element. I would maybe make a tweak here or a tweak there. Or was there a tactic that you used or some element that you used to try and draw that truthful information out of them? Or is it just part of the people that you happen to be connecting with?
If I may, Ken, I think there's certainly a couple of people that I picked with are people that I'd known and worked with for many years. So I knew I had a relationship with both of them, that they would tell it as it is, and they knew I wasn't going to run to my safe space because they'd said this. I didn't like that paragraph. I thought it could have been more effective this way. So that was deliberately picking people who I knew would give me an honest opinion. I think with some of our clients that we use, well, they were used to, this was the sort of thing that we were encouraging people to do as part of the workshop. Sometimes we have to have difficult conversations with employees and co-workers, and we have to find a way to tell people that something needs to improve that's still going to keep them engaged and still going to keep them working with us, but we can't sort of just fluff it around and hope they might get the hint. So we're sort of training people to do that. So people who had been on our workshops sort of knew that that's what we were going to want them to do, because that's what we'd done with them. I don't know if you found something similar with a couple of the pre-readers that you picked out, Ken.
Yes, that's very true. Because I made a point of picking people who were who I knew would be forthright and honest, and we primed them to be forthright and honest. But also, this is I mentioned that I had this background in theater, and I've written more than 25 plays in my life. And of those, I would say that about 8 out of the first 10 sucked.
Right.
And so I learned to take criticism really well. And I've also, the writing of theater is perhaps the most participatory of any writing form. You can imagine the poet locking himself in his attic or garret and, scribing out his little poems and then coming forth, or the novelist like J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter stories, that talks about dropping her kids off at daycare and then sitting in one coffee shop, nursing one cup of coffee all day because it was all she could afford as a single mother, and penning out her book longhand. So, but each of these are stories in isolation. A playwright writes a play by him or herself, but then goes into a room with the actors, and the actors read it back to her because something different happens when it's read out loud. And there's often a director that says, well, this can't happen this way because technically you need the lights to come down to move the scenery and blah, blah, blah. And then the playwright goes back and redoes it and then comes back. And often that process happens maybe, I've gone through that process where it happens like up to 10 times before the play ever actually reaches the stage. And everyone gets their input. And there's a phrase that I mentioned in the book that, in my experience as a playwright, there's really 3 basic human drives that any human has. There's the need to eat, the need to sleep, and the need to rewrite my play for me. So I've developed a really thick skin around receiving that feedback and that criticism and filtering out what's unique to the individual's experience and what's universal to all readers.
I think it's important when you guys are doing it the right way, because one of the things that I know I've learned from a business perspective and from a sales perspective, and this I think equates to most things in life, is that we personally, a lot of times when we create anything, maybe you create a website, maybe you're trying to figure out a sales strategy for your organization or whatever. And we spend copious amounts of time analyzing it ourselves, right? We analyze and we analyze and we do our own thing, and we actually don't get things out there in front of people. And until you get things out there in front of people, you don't actually know anything, right? You just basically, you have to start to, and if I was to equate it to maybe sales, is that, you have to get it, whatever the message is that you're trying to get out there, whatever your pitch is, or however it is you're approaching sales, is that you need to be putting that in front of people to get feedback, to see if it works, gather information, gather data, make adjustments, then go back out, try it again, gather data, gather feedback, make adjustments, and go out again. And that's the only way you're ever going to have something that works. You're never going to get it on your first try. And so oftentimes people, and entrepreneurs in particular, are notoriously bad for this, is that they analyze and analyze and analyze. And it's paralysis by analysis is a cliche for a reason, right? And so they never actually get out there because they're so busy trying to analyze whether this is exactly the right thing before they even put it out in front of anyone.
Yeah. One of my favorite writers, business writers, Seth Godin, often uses the phrase, ship it, just ship it. Yeah. Right. And because once you've shipped the first iteration, you can always go back and do a second iteration, do another iteration, do another iteration. People are so afraid of failure that they're afraid to fail forward. And I think one of the things about my career as a playwright is that I failed so often that I'm really good at it. And so now I can dust myself off and move forward. One of my favorite playwrights in history is Samuel Beckett, the notorious Irish, dour, depressing existentialist who wrote these horribly depressing plays about the horrible human condition. And his one of the lines from his plays is, "Oh, I failed. No matter. Start again. Fail again."
Yeah, it's so true. So I mean, let's translate this onto the business side, I guess, from the book. Take me through how it is that you guys are going out and getting your book in front of your audience. Like, what's your sales process? What's your process to get your readers engaged or get it out there into the public?
Could you repeat the question? I just lost your audio for a moment, and
Sure.
So we may have to edit that out. But could you just repeat and set up that question again, and maybe we'll get Russell to reply to it.
Sure. So essentially, the question is how do you get your book, or how are you getting your book out in front of audiences? Like, what's your sales process? What's the process you're going through in order to, get your book out into the public domain?
Okay, well, it's a couple of things that we've been doing. One is we've started a social media campaign. So we're getting out onto some of the more familiar platforms like sort of Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, and having that extracts of the book, quotes from the book, just having that broadly being put out so that people can interact with it, with a way of sort of coming into the funnel to purchase a copy of the book. It also linked back to one of the reasons for us having the podcast was another way that we could discuss elements of the book specifically, and our sort of ethos around sort of leadership and organizational culture more widely. So people may connect with it that way, and then go, well, what's this book I need to go and be looking at? And our third part is starting to look at, okay, well, how can we look to get on other people's shows and podcasts? And we've got a news press release coming out soon to be able to see if we can get on some of the news channels, both TV and radio, to then be talking about it that way. So it was really the three things: the press release approach through the sort of more formal channels. Then we were looking to go through our social media, and then our podcast as another way of getting people to link into our funnel, in which the book was part of that.
Have you chosen to do a lot of that work yourself? Do you are you getting, like, let's say with press releases as an example? I mean, is that something you're looking at getting support from an outside, and you don't have to tell me who the outside source might be, but are you getting help from an outside source to put together the press release and get in front of media contacts, or is that something you guys have chosen to do on your own?
We've got somebody that we're working with to do that. Typically, our approach generally with it has been we try to find expertise for the gaps in our own knowledge and ability.
Yeah.
And then learn from that so that we're able to, if necessary, do some of the work ourselves. So it's always a bit of a balancing act. In an ideal world, if you could sit there with a blank check, you could just say, who are the best people that do these things, and then just send them large amounts of cash to do it. We don't operate in that world, unfortunately. I don't know if that's
no
letting
small
away
businesses do these days.
We're letting away a little secret there, Ken, that we don't have that bottomless pit. So it's always been a combination of what can we do ourselves and where do we need to bring in some resource. So with our podcast, we have a guy who is doing the sort of editing part and posting our podcast for it and sort of tidying up. But Ken's doing some of the first edit, so we don't have to, invest quite as much. It's similar with our press release. We're doing some of the work ourselves, and then our colleague is actually writing it and then sending that out for us. So we're a bit of mix and match.
Right.
And with regards to social media, we're working with a company that we've encountered called Bitwide, which is helping us expand our social media network. And that's really interesting because with that work, we're getting connected to potential leaders who are ultimately the decision makers that might want to bring this into their company. And that's a great opportunity. So the social media contact is the first point of contact. And then that leads to let's arrange a Zoom call so that we can have a conversation about whatever synergies might be. And then if over the course of that conversation, it proves that one of the lines of business might be these difficult conversations in the organization, then we can offer to send them a sample chapter from the book, for instance. Or if the conversation is particularly engaging, we might send them the book, or even if it's just the sample chapter, then we send them the link, and they might choose to buy the book, and then from there they might choose to either sign up for themselves or some of their employees for the online course, the online introductory course, which gives some of the basics about how to structure a conversation. And then, should they really enjoy that a short intro course, then they can opt into the masterclass series that we're also in the process of building.
So is that what's next? And on the Bitwide side, I'll have to get that contact information for whoever's over there, because it sounds like it's fascinating. It sounds like a fantastic organization.
Well, it's a great company. They're really energetic. They're really engaged, and what I really like about them is they're forthright and honest, and they never hide anything. They're really they really lay it out there.
You want transparency, right?
Exactly.
You want transparency. You definitely want that. So is that what's next? I mean, you talked about the masterclass. Is that kind of the next? I know last year you released the book, and this year you've got the podcast, which I know you're 4 or 5 episodes into the podcast already this year. So is that what's next? Is the masterclass? What do you have on the horizon?
Well, let's get really technical. I mean, when you say last year we released the book, what you mean is December of 2020 we released the book. And when you say this year we released the podcast, what you mean is January of 2021 we released the podcast. Yeah. So yes, the online introductory course is next. And Russell, why don't you speak to that timeline, because that's really your
so we're recording the last of our modules for the introductory course, so that should be ready to go sort of end of January, beginning of February. And then we are hopefully to move, if people do that, we move into our masterclass series, which is going to be sort of, people will have a new online course every month. They'll be doing some live online events with us, and there'll be some sort of Facebook Live stuff and things like that. So trying to build sort of a community of practitioners, of leaders and managers who want to improve their practice, that can come together and do some regular work with us, and we'll also have some sort of individual coaching with that as well as part of that package. And really our sort of shift in there has partly been driven by the COVID-19 pandemic, because as we were alluding to before, a lot of our original work going back into the days when we used to physically see people were face-to-face workshops, and much as we would like to be able to return to those at some point, the last 9 months or so has not been able to do so. So we've had to shift our delivery mechanism for our workshops from probably 95% face-to-face to a 95% online. Hence, we've done some live online sessions, and now we're moving into the workshops that people can do and looking to combine those two. So we've got a live, true online course and the live online sessions and the book and the podcast, and trying to really build that as a package for people. As we go forward through to 2021, and then hopefully we will see some face-to-face workshops come back again later in the year.
Perfect. So last question, advice. You guys have experience in doing a few interesting things. Obviously, the platform in its original format, the book, writing a book, and then the podcast and other interesting things on the horizon. If for the entrepreneurs out there, the people that are considering doing some similar type things that you guys have already gone through, do you have any advice for somebody that's just getting the ball rolling on doing some of those things? Let's start with Ken.
If your listeners are interested in tackling any kind of a big project, whether it's writing a book or writing a series of blog posts or recording a podcast or whatever that project might be, I think a regularly scheduled discipline is necessary. So in some of the times when I've been most successful at writing have been the times when I've gotten up at 6 a.m. every morning, hit the desk by 6:45, and start and dedicate a solid 3 hours to writing. And there's a lot of best practices out there that it's often not about the quality of the writing you do every day, but it's about the consistency of the writing you do. It's about showing up every day and doing the work. It's about turning on your computer and writing your target amount, whether it's 1,000 words, whether it's 5 pages, whether it's 5,000 words, whether it's 10 pages, however you want to measure it. But it's about setting that target and showing up every day. And oftentimes it's not about how much you write, but it's about the fact that you're there for 3 hours. And I know I follow the advice of a lot of writers where I sit down for that required 2 or 3 hours, and it doesn't matter if I write anything. But during those 3 hours, I can't check my email. I can't listen to the radio. I can't check the podcasts. I can't get up and make myself another cup of coffee. I can only do one thing. Even if I sit in front of the computer and don't write a word, I can't stop doing that. Right. Because eventually, from that point on, once you're there and committed, eventually you start putting out the number of words that you need to be able to edit it down into something substantial. And maybe for those who are fearful of the blank page or of the blinking cursor, I might offer a piece of advice from Margaret Atwood, which she's purported to have said that writing is easy. All you have to do is stare at a blank page until drops of blood start to appear and magically form themselves into words.
Russell, last word goes to you. Do you have any advice?
How I follow that? But 3 quick points. The first is have a clear purpose of what you want to achieve. They'll know why you're doing it, so that you've got that point to anchor yourself to. The second one is don't quit when it gets hard. You're going to come across roadblocks. Things are going to happen that you weren't expecting. Don't just give up. And thirdly, be prepared to pivot. You may be prepared to say that I need to do it slightly differently because of circumstances or feedback I've received. So don't hold on to your idea, that you love is your sort of baby, and you won't take any constructive feedback about it. You'll only want to go down that route. Be prepared to pivot. So those are 3 things. Have a clear purpose, don't quit, and be able to pivot.
Yeah, character is not defined by how you behave when times are going well. Character is defined by how you behave when things aren't going well. So I appreciate your time today, Russell, Ken. The book, it's exciting. podcast. I haven't watched or listened to it yet, but I'm definitely going to start doing that. And I appreciate your time today.
Okay, pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen.